Now I want to go ahead and point out to you that Obama is launching all of these wars in Libya, Syria, Central Africa, everywhere without congressional approval. And our system of checks and balances is in the crapper. This is incredible. With more on that, we go to Webster Tarpley, who predicted all of this in the Obama deception. Well, you've just seen the tape. 3.5 years ago, Dr. Webster Tarpley, doctor of history, he's also an economist, predicted this invasion of the continent of Africa via the pretext of humanitarian intervention. And we have seen Libya shattered. He traveled there and was there under the bombardment. First reported, months before it came out, the massacre of black Libyans by the Arab al-Qaeda forces brought in. He predicted the attack on Syria using al-Qaeda. That's now happening. And that McCain and others would call for bombardments that are just days or weeks away. Now, I've done a lot of research to be able to cover this subject, but nothing compared to Webster. But what the establishment's planning on doing is more divide and conquer in Africa. And something bigger than the Congo wars that conservatively killed 8 million people or so. You know, you always hear about the Rwandan massacres. That was just one part of a larger constellation of mass murder that went on, all under the UN's auspices. And, of course, you know, earlier I went over a few articles from just last year. We'll talk more about these with Webster in a moment, where they send the UN into Ivory Coast, you name it, slaughtering tens of thousands and admitting they are. And it's almost always Christians. So it's all part of igniting Christian-Muslim infighting. As Tarpley said 3.5 years ago, kicking the Chinese out of the area. They're trying to use development, not military invasion, as a way to get to natural resources. And we see this new Kony 2012. And again, I'm not saying that Joseph Kony is some wonderful angel. The point is that the larger military that controls the country that he's in, that is fighting against the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, is one of the main command bases for AFRICOM to expand the overall destabilization and genocide program that is the official U.S. government policy of State Department Memorandum 200 by Henry Kissinger, saying use war, use famine, use balkanization, use other things to reduce population and industrialization in Africa from 1973. So this is part of a larger strategy or stratagem. And again, I'm not making moral judgments here on the face of it. I'm not saying the Serbs were wonderful angels, but that whole NATO attack and invasion was about balkanizing, bombing infrastructure, controlling drug routes, giving the Muslim extremists control of Albania. Same thing there. But here, they're getting ready for major genocide, and you heard it here first. It's going to be huge. It was earlier today, of course, I got a call from one of the people that works here, young daughters, a teenager, saying, oh, my gosh, you know, there's this Kony 2012. It's had 37 million views in just 3 days. And then, sure enough, I went and researched it. It's this giant call for war. In fact, they have graphics in here on the site saying something that Republicans and Democrats can both agree on. Let's aid the children, because Kony is grabbing them and using them as soldiers. Well, all of Africa does that. The UN does that. The UN's been caught raping them everywhere. The point is, this is part of a larger program and has nothing to do with the children. Remember, there were the people with Viagra raping the children in Libya? All lies. Saddam throwing babies out of incubators? All lies, admitted. Assad massacres, almost completely exaggerated, with al-Qaeda forces attacking and now caught staging shootings on CNN. This is all blowing up. So it's a pretext, just like I read the quote earlier with William Randolph Hearst, the owner of the Hearst Empire, saying, look, Remington Painter, you supply the paintings, the pictures, I'll supply the war. Okay, so that's what's happening here. And you better believe when they're done getting all the trendies clamoring and the children, you know, the young people, save the children over there, we're children. Of course, they're, again, the propaganda of the Pentagon and the globalists is now targeting American and Western children. They know the adult world's woken up, so now through social networks, all the things they control, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the places where we're censored, they are just going in and saying, get behind war, and all these bizarre posters about demand war, demand invasion. And we saw Obama in an exploratory operation, London Telegraph reported on. Obama deploys U.S. Special Forces to Central Africa. They tried that and they failed. And other investigative reporters that have gone over there to cover this, they die. But these other folks putting out this Kony 2012, they were able to be there for years and get all this useful material. They may be useful idiots, but bottom line, I know packaged propaganda when I see it. And I know the West policy to genocide Africans and to give them those special vaccines where half of them get HIV. So I know the score. When the West wants to help Africa, like Bill Gates and his GMO, look out. Dr. Tarpley, again, I've tried to go over some of this here, but it is mind-blowing to see how they use Twitter, Facebook to overthrow their old dictator in Egypt, and then now things are 10 times worse. To overthrow a guy who'd made deals with him, Gaddafi, now things are 20 times worse. No one debates that. With Assad, I mean, this is order out of KO. You have studied Africa like no one else I know. You've been there many times. You predicted it in the Obama deception. Everything is happening as you said it would. What's really going on here?
Well, I think there are really two sides to this. One is the strategic reality of what the U.S. and the British are doing in Africa. And then there's this viral video, right, from the Invisible Children organization with movie stars and political influentials, and how they're trying to create an actual war hysteria in the American people, which I think can be applied to Africa and also some other places. Let's just take a look at Uganda, which is where this is focused. For the past 25 years or so, since Yoweri Museveni became the dictator of Uganda, and he's a dictator. He's been there for 26 years, right? He's up there with Mubarak and some other people. You never hear that as a complaint, though. He's a great guy. We don't even hear a word about him. Museveni has been the dictator of Uganda since about 1986. And as a result of his rule, which is already with many atrocities and human rights abuses, there's a resistance movement in the northern provinces, which are inhabited by the Acholi people. And that takes this monstrous form of the Lord's Resistance Army under Joseph Kony. And Kony is the figure that is demonized in this film. Now, Kony, one may well say, deserves all the demonization he gets. I think in this case that may well be true. But Kony is not the main story in Uganda, right? Kony has been out of it for several years. As far as I can see, for the last 4 or 5 years, Kony has been nowhere.
Exactly. So to be clear, it's a larger region. We've already had massacres, in one case 7 million, 1 million in another area, with all these different groups. He's a very minor player. He's just the war hysteria person to be demonized as the pretext for African to really pour in and prop up the dictator.
Right. It's a very incongruous choice, because he's out there in the bush with a couple of hundred followers. Now, he's undoubtedly got child soldiers. It's undoubtedly hell on earth for the people that are there. But you look at this film and you see, what are their demands? What do they think should happen? These Invisible Children and the TRI group and their backers, right? Who are their backers? Ocampo, the imperialist stooge who runs the International Criminal Court. He'll indict anybody you want, right? Milosevic, General Bashir of Sudan. How about Bush and Cheney? Ever indict them? Oh, no, not Ocampo. And then we've got a reactionary Republican like Senator Inhofe. Looks like we've got Senator Kerry interested in it. We've got some of these other warmonger hack politicians that we know so well. So the idea, though, is the Ugandan army has to be strengthened. Strengthen the Ugandan army. Are we nuts? The Ugandan army is a party to the biggest genocide in the world since the Second World War, which is the Congo War. The Congo War from the late 90s until, say, the middle of the past decade killed something like 7 or 8 million people, and Uganda invaded Congo and carved out about 1/3 of the country with unbelievable atrocities. So you'd really say between Kony and the Ugandan army, the much bigger war criminal, the wholesalers of genocide, are the Ugandan army and not Kony. Now, this is, he would be a retailer, of course, and that's very serious. Uganda has always been the British enforcer, the British-U.S. enforcer in this part of the world. I remember visiting Khartoum in the Sudan 15 or more years ago, and the information minister showed me boxes of weapons that had been used to try to foment a rebellion in southern Sudan, right? What you see now as southern Sudan, the area around Juba. And these boxes said, Defense Ministry of Uganda, Kampala, Uganda. So they'd been supporting this, and this entire story of the massacre of the Tutsis in the mid 1990s, Museveni and his group also very much implicated in that story. So if you look at this entire area, it is a horrendous human rights hell on earth, really. In Uganda itself, about 40% of the people live on less than €1 a day. So there's tremendous poverty, right? You'd think they might say something about that. All of these other countries that were involved in that war, and now, of course, new wars are starting up. The common denominator of all these wars, really, is that the U.S. and the British want to drive the Chinese out of Africa, and in particular, this strategically important area, right? This is one of the main concentrations in the world of strategic minerals and strategic raw materials.
Well, mainly rare earth minerals, key things that are needed in electronics. But
Yes.
let's expand on that. People say, well, good, America's defending its interest. These are globalists that actually shut down our industry and pay to move it offshore. So they're just using America's muscle. But that's exactly my point. Obviously, this group, this Lord's Resistance Army, from my research, is involved in some criminal activities and some massacres, but it's a tiny, as you said, maximum a few thousand followers, a few hundred soldiers. It's literally a red herring pretext to go in. Same story we've seen: babies, incubators, raping the women and children, fueled by Viagra. Totally fake. Assad massacres.
Don't forget Gay Girl in Damascus.
Gay Girl in Damascus.
By the way, Bouazizi, when I was just in Iran, I talked to a Tunisian filmmaker. He explained that the whole Bouazizi story, right, the Tunisian fruit vendor, that's a fraud too. So they're all frauds. But it's copper, cobalt, uranium, gold, magnesium, tin, plus these other ones, that molybdenum and these really exotic rare earth elements. So then you go a little bit further south.
But again, let me stop you, Webster, because we need to look at the larger image here. You predicted all of this. They've gone into Libya, wrecked everything, exactly as you said they would. Racial massacres, everything. Where's the Hollywood people on this? Where's the film? Where's the 37 million views in 4 days? You can see the system behind this, who we know wants to genocide in Africa. So, again, the filmmakers may be useful idiots. I just see establishment fingerprints all over this. What's the larger AFRICOM plan? What do they want to do to Africa?
It is to lay waste to the continent, to destroy every independent state, sort of on the Libyan model, right? Libya, the eastern part of Libya has just declared its sort of semi-independence, and that could be a civil war right there.
Al-Qaeda,
Al-Qaeda, Cyrenaica, Benghazi, these places, right? So a terrorist state, the new Barbary pirates, if you want, on the southern coast of the Mediterranean. Very bad for Europe, very bad for shipping in the Mediterranean. But the general idea is that the Chinese must be kicked out at all costs. And since the Chinese support existing governments wherever they are, whatever they are, the United States and the British have to destroy all the existing governments. And Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi are key parts of that effort. In other words, they're sort of the indigenous troops. But of course, there's more. There's also Kenya, right? Obama's ancestral home, where he's got these deals with his cousin Odinga. Somalia, right? There's been military action between Somalia.
So as you said 3.5 years ago, all of Africa a battlefield on fire. But let's go back, since you were just mentioning, this larger program. For people out there, then, what's the long-term goal?
It is the destruction of every independent state, secessionism, warlords, chaos, right? If you go to the Arab world, as I've found, you hear words from the Bush years that maybe we didn't pay enough attention to. Condoleezza Rice in 2005 began talking about creative chaos. creative chaos. And everybody in the Arab world knew that that meant that their countries were going to be destroyed, split into pieces, or as Brzezinski calls it, Brzezinski has his own term, microstates and mini-states. So anybody who's a secessionist, anybody who's a warlord, anybody who wants, rump states or things like this, that's exactly the imperialist program.